Thank the gentleman. Mr. Auchincloss.
Thank you, Chairman. I want to build off something that Ms. Benford talked about at the beginning of this hearing regarding flexibility for states. I would take that a step further and say that, in fact, we need an entire overhaul of how we do transportation funding. We've got to free our infrastructure from the grip of big oil and car-centric planning by handing highway funding and administration entirely over to the states and redirecting the federal gas tax to support more bottoms-up initiatives. The Highway Trust Fund is running such a massive deficit that the gas tax couldn't meet its needs even if it were 5 times higher. And what is doled out is allocated without reference to the metrics that matter most, like how well projects connect people to jobs, services, and one another. The driving metric is simply more vehicle miles. And to the detriment of state budgets, the federal transportation system incentivizes states to build road after road without regard to future costs of maintenance, operation, and environmental impact. The solution to this is not tweaks to the gas tax or tweaks to transportation funding, it's devolution. Congress should leave highway taxation and spending entirely to the states and commensurately remove federal red tape and regulations on highways beyond a minimum standard of safety so that states and cities can use their dollars to address local mobility with organic solutions. Federal gas tax should remain, but be used instead to subsidize locally sponsored projects that promote walkability, micromobility, and transit. This is going to have 3 beneficial impacts. First, it will give states and cities more latitude that will encourage local innovation and help us find better transportation solutions. Second, it will compel an honest accounting of the cost of car-centric infrastructure. I heard this during this testimony as well from Secretary Millar about the safety impacts. I would hazard that we can spend as much money as we want. We can match the full $1.4 trillion that accidents cost us in funding the departments of transportation. But if we continue to build car-centric infrastructure, we're going to continue to get car accidents. And more tragically to the point, we're going to continue to kill pedestrians, which the United States is doing at an alarming and increasing rate. And finally, a transparent account of the cost of maintenance of highways will make it more likely that states implement strategies like congestion pricing and improved alternative mobility options like cycling lanes, rail, and on-demand transit. This transition will be disruptive to politicians and bureaucrats, but the net effect will be a lower carbon footprint, better mobility, and more walkable downtowns. And Chairman, I'd like to introduce to the record, submit to the record rather, the op-ed I wrote to this effect for Strong Towns.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. Mr. Millar, if you were free as Secretary of Transportation from federal regulations and the federal funding umbilical cord for highways, and instead you had to maintain your own highways with state-generated funds, and to think about transportation from first principles in your state, how might things change?
Mr. Carnes, that's a great question. Prior to COVID, federal funding was 15% of the budget of the Washington State DOT. It's currently about 30% of our budget, but it is a fraction, a very important and very, very welcome and appreciated fraction. But there are 2 things I don't do as Secretary of Transportation in Washington State. I don't appropriate the money, and I don't set policy. That's done by our state legislature. Our state legislature in the 23-25 biennium has invested $406 million in public transportation, invested $150 million in active transportation, invested substantially in decarbonizing our fleet. We're working with transit agencies across the state on decarbonization. If there's one thing I could do, and I've asked the legislature to consider this as they move forward, we have about 1,100 miles of highway, state highway in Washington State that go through population centers, not the limited access freeways, but you mentioned strong towns, the STROADs, the roads.
You're a Strong Towns
reader. I'm familiar with strong towns, yes.
That's terrific.
We have recommended a safety program, a competitive grant program specifically for state highways that go through population centers, because we're trying to move people through those spaces while providing access to those spaces at the same time. And the need for pedestrian and bicycle and automobile safety investment is huge, because The fatality rates on those highways are twice the state average.
Yes.
The serious injury rates on those highways are 3 times the state's average.
Yes. Unfortunately, it's going to persist for so long as the federal government continues to incentivize car-centric highway infrastructure as opposed to empowering states to connect people to jobs and services through the multitude of modalities, walking, cycling, micromobility. We need to let the states run their transportation systems and not be subsidizing automobiles. Yield back.